Welcome to the show. It's IB Nation Sports Talk along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. We've got a lot to talk about today. We've got Notre Dame quarterbacks to talk about, both short term and long term. We've got some stuff from Jack Swarbrick we're going to talk about. We've got some Sam Hartman stuff we're going to talk about. It's so full of things. Before we get to any of that, though, I want to be sure and wish all the veterans out there happy early Veterans Day to all my fellow veterans of all services. Veterans Day observed is tomorrow, Friday. The actual Veterans Day is Saturday. Happy Marine Corps birthday as well on Friday to all the devil dogs out there, like our old pal Tommy Guns, who celebrate. My dad, a Marine Corps veteran as well. And of course, I've always kind of like, why does the Marine Corps make such a big deal about their birthday? The Army is actually older than the Marine Corps by like 5 months, I think. The Navy is actually a little bit older than the Marine Corps, but of course, leave it to the Marines. Got to have their own special thing. Can't just be Veterans Day. It's got to be Marine Corps birthday as well.
Is this why you're wearing your salute to service gear?
I did. I put on my Cowboys salute to service shirt today, but happy Veterans Day, happy Marine Corps birthday, the whole thing out there this weekend. How are you today, Jess?
I'm good. Easy day of work. Finally got some projects submitted, so it's kind of coming down off the cliff of being super busy. I had so much free time the last day that I built my own NBA betting sheet, projection sheet that I've been trying to explain to you the last couple of days. So that should show my my level of busyness the last couple of days. But I'm really excited. I feel like I'm onto something here.
At least one thing came true, or at least one bet.
The one I was most like certain of hit, and that felt pretty good.
True. Have to keep working on it, keep tweaking it,
tinkering,
see how it goes. That's right. Well, we are talking about quarterbacks today, and it's been shall we say, a hot topic of conversation, especially since last.
Anything offense has been a hot topic of discussion.
It has, and we're going to talk specifically about how Notre Dame should handle the quarterback situation going forward. And this is multifaceted. It's really a couple of different topics within one, because you've got both the short-term situation and you've got the long-term situation, and both of them really have to be addressed in relatively short order. The short term is, it's like the fire closest to the derriere, as a coworker of mine used to say, and still does, former coworker of mine would say. He still says it, I guess. The fire closest to the butt is what he says. But the short term, as in the next two games, Wake Forest and Stanford. And there are a lot of people who think that, Notre Dame is 7-3. You just lost this ugly game to Clemson. They're 7-3. There's no New Year's Six Bowl to play for. It's out of the question now. So why are you wasting your time with this grad transfer, Sam Hartman, who hasn't played well? All the big picture stuff is out of the question. So roll with Steve Angeli and or Kenny Menchie, and Sam Hartman needs to find his way to the bench. So let's talk about this short-term issue first. Wake Forest, Stanford. What do you think, Jess? Do you buy into this? Play for the future, roll out the two young guys, or at least one of the young guys out there, if not both of them, and send Sam Hartman packing? Or what should they do in these next couple of games?
Me personally, I think that Notre Dame should continue to roll with Sam Hartman as their quarterback. And this will be what I'm about to say. I know a lot of people would rebuttal and say, well, we don't owe Sam Hartman anything, but Sam Hartman still made a conscious decision to use his last year of eligibility at the University of Notre Dame. And the goal was to help Notre Dame and Notre Dame would help him in his draft stock. Like that's got to be the number one kind of overarching goal for both sides of this kind of, I guess you could call it, transaction, right? Well, Sam Hartman hasn't played as probably well as anticipated, and Notre Dame hasn't performed as well as anticipated. So now the question has become, what do you do with a quarterback that's going to be no service next year, right? Like there's nothing to gain. Yeah. He's going to provide no benefit for the upcoming seasons. But what I would say is that this team is still comprised of a lot of players other than Sam Hartman, and you can't compromise their rest of the season just because you don't feel like these games have any meaning. These games still mean a lot to a lot of seniors or guys who are potentially going to be graduating. Basically, anyone who won't be playing football next year at Notre Dame. These games are still meaningful, right? Like this is how you're ending your college career. No one just wants to be a part of this experimental guinea pig of what happens next. And I would say that the bigger point or overarching point would be that there's no guarantee that you win these games with Angeli or Minchie as your quarterback. Roll Angeli out there or Minchie out there and you lose the game, I think you're even in more heat than last season. And you really, really can't afford to lose either of these last two games. And Sam Hartman still gives you the best chance to win those games. You don't know what you're going to get out of anyone else. You at least have a good idea of what you're going to get from Sam Hartman.
You can't treat these games like exhibition games just because there's no New Year's Six Bowl to play for. And you just can't treat them like an exhibition game. So now we're just going to throw anybody out there and just kind of experiment. The only question to ask is, who gives your team the best chance to win? And that's quarterback, that's any position on the field. That it's just like any other game. Because these games matter to both Marcus Freeman and the program. Because they are 7-3. Like, there's a big difference between 7-5 and 9-3. If they were to lose these next two games, like a massive difference between 9-3 and 7-5, especially as a head coach and the state of your program and everything else going forward. If you're in the let's start Steve Angeli boat or Kenny Minchie or whatever it happens to be, are you going to be happy if they start him and then they lose the next two games? Because you just said, well, we've got to play for the future here. We've got to develop this quarterback, see what he's got, that kind of stuff. If Steve Angeli, if the coaching staff actually thinks that Steve Angeli does, or Kenny Minchie, give them the best chance to win, then okay, go with that. But I don't think that that's what they think. I think Sam Hartman still gives them the best chance to win, and that's why I think you've got to stick with Sam Hartman. Because, again, the goal is to win these games. These are not exhibition games. And if you lose these games because of who you put on the field and or who you don't put on the field, you're going to feel a heck of a lot worse after the fact, especially if you're Marcus Freeman and you're trying to build this, continue to build this program in the shape that you want to going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, the thing is, if you really think that Steve Angeli or Minchie would perform better than Sam Hartman, you're just sadly mistaking. Like if Sam Hartman is having issues in this offense and it's whatever, maybe he's not making the reads properly, pre-snap, whatever it might be, how is Steve Angeli with zero experience a better option than Sam Hartman with 5+ years of experience, right? Like if a guy of Sam Hartman's caliber is going to struggle, there's no way that Angeli or Minchie wouldn't struggle because they're just not near, the same skill level or experience level that Sam Hartman provides at the end of the day. And I think that the ultimate way to approach these games is how you approach Navy, how you approach Pittsburgh. If you really want to see these guys in there and develop, then go out there and take care of business against crappy teams and get a lead.
Starters got to get it done. That's right. That's the way you approach all of it in terms of getting guys on the field and getting them that experience. Mr. 2.0 says, I don't know why people still act like we shouldn't play for a better season than they had last year, still on the table. It is. It's absolutely still on the table. Even if it's only a 1-game increment, there is still a chance at a better season than the season before. And no, it hasn't worked out the way anyone wanted it to work out so far. But I just don't think I don't think you go this drastic and you're just gonna disregard everything now and push all your chips into we've got to see what we've got with these guys, so we've got to start them. It's just the same as it's always been. Like Joe says, let Sam run at the score if he can on Wake Forest, then pull him, then pull him. Same for Stanford. Yeah, basically, it's just what you said, Jess. The starters go out there, they do their jobs, and then you get the reserves in as much as possible. But even then, I don't have a problem if you want to work Steve Angeli and or Kenny Minchie in at some point, and over the course of the game before it's 35-0 or whatever at halftime or at the end of the third quarter, whatever it happens to be. Like, if you've got a 2-touchdown lead, say, and you decide, okay, let's let Steve Angeli have a series in the second quarter, I've got no problem with that. What do you think about that? Is that too soon? Is there a threshold? Is there, kind of a mark that you look at where you'd be willing to do that? I've got no problem working him in for a series or two in the course of the game, even if it's not a complete blowout situation.
No, I don't have a problem with that either, actually. And I think that you have to do it in a way like it can't be like the Brian Kelly type situation where if Sam Hartman goes out there and he's having a bad couple series, you just pull cord and put Steve Angeli in there. I think that you have to have your offense has to look good. It has to you have to have some sort of lead. And yeah, I just don't think there's a situation where Angeli is coming in a close game, a game where Notre Dame is losing, a game where Sam Hartman might be struggling a little bit. I think that is where you might get into trouble, because then you're potentially introducing discontinuity within the offense. That's not who the offense practices with. That's not, that's not who the offensive line is used to in cadence, all of those things. And so I'm all aboard getting Angeli in there. But I think you have to have a sizable lead before you do that. I don't think there's any situation where you bring him in a close game.
Well, again, what's your definition of close? That's why I said 2 touchdowns or more.
I would say 3-4 score game, 3 to 4 touchdown lead.
Okay, even if it's only one drive, like you're going to say, okay, one drive, one series, one possession, whatever it happens to be. Sloppy Joe, I thought, brought up a good point. If Pine or Buckner were the ones who had 5 touchdowns and 7 picks over their last 6 games, would Angeli be in at quarterback? I think it's a legitimate question.
I think that you would see a lot more what we were just kind of talking about, maybe some rotation at quarterback. Maybe this guy gets the first 2 series, maybe the next guy gets the next 2 series. I think that would definitely be a stronger possibility if the quarterback wasn't named Sam Hartman. Let me ask you, I kind of want to pose a question to you. If you had to pick right now, would you bench Sam Hartman for the last 2 games, or would you fire Jared Parker for the last 2 games?
Wow. I mean, you're coming in hot. So I've got to pick one of those 2 things?
Got to pick one of those 2 things.
Wow.
If it came down to it.
I've got to do one or the other.
I'm not saying that this would happen, and I'm not saying you're advocating for either of these. I'm just saying if, point blank, a decision had to be made and they were seriously trying to look up to find ways to change, which one would you do? Would you hand over the reins to a different quarterback, or would you hand over the reins to a different offensive coordinator?
The problem with this is we still don't know the entire inner workings of exactly who is to blame, who, like head coach, offensive coordinator, like who wants what done exactly, right? We don't know if Jared Parker is running the offense that his head coach wants him to run, or if Jared Parker is completely to blame, like it definitely sounded like with some of the spooked comments and stuff like that, that like Marcus Freeman, I think you might have said it, was pointing as close to a finger as we've ever seen him point, like
Yeah.
things need to change. We've heard these other things coming up. So I guess my point is, if you bench Sam Hartman, but Jared Parker is still going to remain your offensive coordinator going forward, then what good
Does it really matter?
does it do? Yeah, what
You're
good
just
does
putting
it
a
do?
new face on on the same situation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You've still got the same guy, so if that's going to be the case, and I don't think like this is not an Alex Grinch situation. This is not a Brian Van Gorder situation. This offense does not look good, and Sam Hartman has obviously not performed at an optimal level for the last 5 games with the 7 interceptions. So, like I don't think that firing Jared Parker with basically 3 games to go, including the bowl game, I don't think it accomplishes anything right now. So I would not do that. So I guess again, if you're
If you
asking
had
me
to.
between the two, if I have to make a pick, I would probably go with the younger quarterback rather than jettison the offensive coordinator with 2 games to go.
Nice. Okay. I was just curious.
I know that was a long way to get there. So what's your answer since you sprung it on me?
I think I thought one way, and then I heard what you said, and it made a lot of sense. Because I don't think you're just going to come up with a new scheme in the last 2 weeks out of thin air, right? Like you're probably going to do a lot of the same stuff that you've been practicing all year. Maybe you come up with some new routes or again some route running concepts or something like that. But you have to start looking at what ultimately could be changed in a span of 2 weeks. I think the only time you could really see some potential change is between the end of season and then until the bowl game. That would be a potential window to maybe work on some stuff. But I think I lean towards you. As much as I want to say Jared Parker, I think it logistically would make more sense that it would be Sam Hartman. And then I think the last point that I would like to make in kind of this argument is, say you play Angeli or Minchie, is that really the guy that you're rolling with to start the season next year? Like, if you really are trying to get these guys experience, again, is that really who's going to be your starter at the start? You know what I mean? That's who you're taking in to Texas to College Station next year? Steve Angeli, that's the guy who's leading your program?
There is a line of thinking, and I saw this mentioned on the boards within the last couple of days that one of our subscribers was saying that he doesn't generally favor going out and going to the transfer portal to bring in a starting quarterback for next year, with the exception of that's where you're starting off next season at Texas A&M. And do you want an inexperienced quarterback? You're basically a notch below where you were last year. I mean, that was the argument last year. Why didn't you go out and get a grad transfer a transfer portal quarterback? You started off the season at Ohio State with Tyler Buckner. They played, and now at Texas A&M, there's talent on that roster. We all know that. They're not nearly as good as Ohio State, though, but it is a road game. And I mean, look at the way they're playing on the road this year. I mean, that is one of the biggest arguments for going out and getting a transfer portal quarterback. Like, if you look at it just from that perspective, how much does that influence? But we talked about the short-term and the long-term aspects of this quarterback situation. The long-term aspect is the transfer portal part of it that's coming up here in the offseason, and that is all being evaluated as we speak, and they might know exactly what they're going to do, or at least have an idea of what they're going to do at this point. So what do you think about that? How much does that influence whether or not you're going to go get a portal quarterback because you open up the season next year at Texas A&M? And it is, by the way, as we've talked about on the show before, it is a much more forgiving schedule next year than this year. And can you make the case that you should be able to navigate, with that A&M road game to open up the season being a tough test for a young, inexperienced quarterback? But should you be able to navigate the schedule they're going to have next year with a younger, inexperienced quarterback?
I think if you were to pick a season that would be best to restart or set that foundation of quarterback development, next year is a really good year to do it, because you have your toughest game is not toughest, but your probably most anticipated, one of your most anticipated games of the season is the very first one. So you get that one out of the way. You have a very favorable, schedule after that. And then, like someone mentioned in the chat, it's the new playoff format. You don't have to worry about going undefeated and have that pressure anymore as Notre Dame. And so what does that new kind of era look like for Notre Dame? Is 2 losses acceptable? I know 1 and no losses would be acceptable. I don't think 3 losses will get you into the new playoff as well. And so you still have to work under the operations of, we really can't afford to lose more than 2 games. And say you drop that first game at Texas A&M, well, now you got 1 more loss to play with, right? With the remaining schedule. And so even though it's an easier schedule in terms of, past schedules, and it allows for an opportunity maybe to let a younger quarterback get some of that experience, it's still a tricky situation to play with, because again, you can only really afford to have 2 losses, in my opinion. I think the 3rd loss is what will knock you out of
everyone's assuming that just because you're going on the road and you've got an inexperienced quarterback means you're going to lose, because I'm looking at the stuff in the chat right here, and it's like, well, so just take the loss week 1. What if you've got the better roster overall and the quarterback you're going to put on the field is going to be young and inexperienced, but still pretty good? Like, you can't let one game influence your entire philosophy on how you want to develop the most important position on the roster. Either you believe in these guys or not at some point, and you've got to make that decision because you've been recruiting them. And Jelly is still he's a little bit more on that bubble in terms of, like, obviously Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr are what you would call the true Freeman era quarterback recruits, right? So, like,
right.
And Jelly came in at the same time, but at the same time, he wasn't necessarily being recruited actively by the guy who is currently the head coach of the program right now. It was a different guy. But I think that we've generally pretty much synced up on the fact that at some point, if you are a legit program and you're recruiting the right kind of guys, the right kind of talent at quarterback, you're going to have to roll the dice at some point, and not necessarily roll the dice, but you're going to have to roll with your guy at some point. You're going to have to put someone on the field who is not going to have a ton of experience, but who is going to be talented, and there is a lot of upside, and you have faith that over the long haul can elevate your program. It's just a matter of, are you doing it next year? Are you doing it the year after? When are you going to do it? Because you've got to do it at some point.
Yeah, and I think next year is the perfect year to do it.
I do too. With
the schedule,
even if that means
presented.
Maybe you take a little bit. Yeah, you might take a little bit of a lump, but you're not just writing off game 1 because you've got an inexperienced quarterback. But you might take a little bit of a lump. But next year's schedule is the kind of schedule that sets itself up that you should be able to ride with that, with young and inexperienced but high upside quarterback next year. And then, again, you're not writing anything off, but now you're building for the future, and you're setting the program up for success in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of people are in the chat saying, oh, there's no way Notre Dame has a better roster than Texas A&M. Really? Because Texas A&M is 5-4 this year. Texas A&M last year was 5-7. The year before that, they were 8-4. Year before that, COVID year, they were 9-1. Their best season under Jimbo Fisher.
When Notre Dame brings in the new batch of freshmen next year, it's gonna keep getting better.
They've had better recruiting classes than Texas A&M.
Right.
If they had better recruiting classes.
Yeah. Texas A&M had one really good NIL class, and look what they've done with it. It hasn't
It doesn't
produced any
matter
wins.
because with the roster they have and apparently Jimbo Fisher, they still can't do better than Notre Dame. And so I don't buy it that Notre Dame doesn't have at least the same amount of talent on their roster than Texas A&M. And you can't convince me that Texas A&M just has this roster that's so astoundingly better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame's had better recruiting classes. Notre Dame is getting their younger talent on the field earlier than Texas A&M is. And so I really don't buy that.
And again, are you going to let one game against Texas A&M make your whole decision on what, like your blueprint, your path, like what, how you're setting the program up? Like you're Notre Dame.
Can't allow one game to dictate the whole season.
Yes. And again, you're Notre Dame. You've been better than Texas A&M for how long? Like there's no reason just because, I mean, they've got a great environment down there, much better than a place like NC State, for example. When we, talk about home
Texas
field advantage,
A&M hasn't hit
what
double-digit
is a home
wins
field advantage
since Kevin Sumlin's first year, and that first year they made to the SEC with Johnny Manziel. They have not had double-digit wins since that year, and you're trying to tell me that they are in a better place than Notre Dame? There's just no way. Notre Dame has more 10-win seasons. They have more playoff appearances. They have more New Year's Six appearances. They have better recruiting classes since Marcus Freeman got here. There's just no way. And if you have a defense like you do this year, you can find a way for Angeli to win. If you're comfortable with going with Tyler Buckner against Ohio State at Ohio State, you could be comfortable with Steve Angeli at Texas A&M. I'm sorry.
Yes. Especially like, let's look at all the people who fell in love with Steve Angeli right away. So now you're doubting that just because you're going to Texas A&M? Yeah, okay. So they've got a nice, again, home field situation, home field environment, the whole thing. Crystal says, let's not forget next season the defense will be young. Well, at least some of it will be young. You're still going to have Benjamin Morrison back. You're still going to have Jaden Mickey back. You're going to have Christian Gray. That's a pretty good three to start with right there. What's going to happen up front is still to be determined. And we were talking about last night, who knows what the heck is going to happen? You got to remember, all three of the linebackers at the top of the depth chart have another year of eligibility remaining. So while I know there's a lot of people who want to just see them all disappear as quickly as possible, there's no guarantee that that's happening. I would wager a large sum of money that at least one of them will be back next year.
Oh, you're talking about me and Vince were talking about that. Yeah, me and Vince are talking about that. Everyone wants to see these linebackers go, but I guarantee, like you said, I guarantee at Bertrand or one of the two of Bertrand or Maris will be back. I don't think Kaiser. I think Kaiser's role on the defense is continuously dwindling. And so I don't consider him as a guy who's potentially back next season for whatever reasons, at least in a starter role. And so, I would be very comfortable wagering a good sum of money that either Bertrand or Maris Liufau will be back and be a starter again next season.
Crystal says Mickey and Gray have how many starts? One starts on defense are overrated because you substitute freely in and out. And did you see how they played against Pittsburgh? I'd say they fared pretty well against Pittsburgh.
Did you see that whole thing when, I don't know if you saw this because you didn't see the first half, and I don't know how much you got caught up since being back from Paris, but Marcus, there was a decision in the game during one of the early Clemson drives to rest Morrison and Cam Hart, and Mickey and Gray came onto the field and got the ball moved on them.
But that's a situation, again, like I understand sitting guys, for a couple of reps, or I've never agreed with how they've gone about when they plug young guys in there the last few years, like do you have to have both of them out there at the same time? Like, can you have Benjamin Morrison still on one side or Cam Hart on one side and one of the other two out there at the same time? And, to just decide that you're going to give these two guys a whole series off together does not make much sense.
Did it feel like the right decision?
No. But but they're both very good is my point. And the other point is it's college football and college sports in general. Turnover is part of the game. You've got to deal with it. South Carolina women's basketball lost all 5 starters to the first round of the WNBA draft. Did it look like they showed it out there Monday
Well,
night?
that's what good development looks like. It doesn't matter when you continuously plug and chug every season.
Yes. And that's what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what Marcus Freeman has talked about is the development. And now, again, like there are obvious issues with the quarterback position that have got to be figured out. Bobby Jesus follower Reeves, thanks for the super chat. He says he likes Sam. The ceiling now is the Pop-Tart Bowl win. Big deal. See what you have in Kenny and Jelly the last 3 games. Let Sam focus on the NFL. See, I just disagree with that because, again,
thanks for the chat, though.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the super chat. The ceiling might be a Pop-Tart Bowl win, but again, are you good with 7-6 if that's what your plan produces for you?
What's the floor if you lose those games? What are you playing
right.
in the freaking Pinstripe Bowl against Rutgers again?
Right. Are you good with losing the last 4 games of the season and possibly losing, every player on the roster for making that decision if that's what it ends up being? And I'm not saying that like, and Jelly Minchie are guaranteed to go lose these games. I'm just saying because, again, like you're willing to do it now. You're willing to say and Jelly and or Minchie need to play now, but you're scared to death. And I'm not saying you specifically, Bobby Reeves, but the general sentiment of what we've seen in the chat, you're fully willing to throw these guys out there right now because, hey, we're 7-3 and there's nothing to play for right now. So let's turn these into exhibition games and just throw everybody on the roster out there to see what they can do. You're willing to do it now, but you're scared to death about Texas A&M next year, about a little bit of relative inexperience.
First game of the season.
Right. Is the experience that Angeli or Minchie could gain in these next couple of games going to put them over the top when they go to Texas A&M? They're still not going to play in a true road environment before then. Well, you think Stanford is going to give them any true road test in a couple of weeks with the 15,000 people, if they're lucky, who are going to show up to watch that game? It's just like I don't get the double standard in some of these arguments when you start saying, well, you should do this now, but next year, oh man, I'm scared to death of that. I just don't get it.
Some of these recent comments are just making me chuckle.
Quantum potential cannot be serious. 7-6 is a respectable record. I'm happy if we can just get to 500. Anything else above that is all gravy and a successful season. Heck, MLB doesn't typically get past 500. Just look at the Pirates. I'm going to assume that you're being very sarcastic there. Joe Allen says, will Sam really play in a bowl game, though? We'll kind of address that a little bit, I think, when we kick off rapid fire with where he's being projected in terms of the NFL draft right now. I don't think that it's a lock that he sits out the bowl game, personally.
I don't think so either, actually. And then another kind of thing that popped up.
I think it'd be a lot different if he were playing like he did the first 4 games of this season.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people are, taking into the fact like Marcus Freeman doesn't want. I don't think as a head coach you aspire to potentially just go out there and have some exhibition games with quarterbacks that you don't necessarily know what the result you're going to get, and then potentially have. Like if Marcus Freeman lost these next 2 games, it's a regression from the season before. You regressed in season 2 than season 1. What head coach aspires to regress?
And you're also losing games
wants to
in
throw
November.
out some quarterbacks.
Right.
The games that
you're
matter
also
the
losing
most.
games in November which do matter the most. And Bobby with another super chat. So a Pop-Tart Bowl winner, 7-6 in a Pinstripe Bowl. Neither is a national championship or New Year's 6. So who cares? I guess is what I'm saying. I get it. But again, I guarantee you that's not what Marcus Freeman is thinking.
I would much rather take
Because
a 10-3 record in the Pop-Tart Bowl than a 7-6 record in a Pinstripe Bowl win. Those are, to
yes.
me, I know it's not a national championship, and I know it's not, New Year's
Well, you're not
6.
going to win the Pinstripe Bowl if you're 7-6. You'd
Right.
end up 8-5 potentially at that point,
But
assuming you lost the other.
this isn't a case of Ricky Bobby. It's not, if you're not first, you're last type mentality. And I think that's kind of what Bobby Reeves is getting at here is if you're not in the big one, then what's it ultimately matter? You still have to take steps forward as a program, right? Like, you can't honestly tell me that at the beginning of this season that you expected Marcus Freeman in year 2 as a head coach with a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback coach, a new offensive line coach, that the expectations were literally national championship or bust. The expectations were to show progress and to show development amongst some of the key positions going forward. I think that they've shown progression in a lot of the key positions except quarterback. And that's why we're having this discussion now. But as a program, you can't just say that these games don't matter, because there's still a lot on the table of the progression of a program as a whole, just because you didn't reach the national championship.
Jeff Z says, have Sam play the rest of the way. Getting to 10 wins is a big deal. And that's one of the best points that I've heard all night, because I remember back in 2017 when they were sitting there, 9 wins during the regular season following the horrendous 2016 season. And the person that I used to work with always talked about, what difference do these bowl games make? They don't make any difference. They're all exhibitions if they're not playoff games, and blah, 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 blah. BS. Because this was my point. One, you can talk about young guys getting bowl practice and, all the extra practice and reps and all that stuff. But 2, as you sit back and you look at the previous, the 5 years prior to Marcus Freeman, you had 5 straight years of what? Double-digit wins. That's right. And you look back and you can say, well, that extra win doesn't matter. Winning a bowl game doesn't matter, but it absolutely does when you are a head coach and you are a program, and you can look back and point to, look at the run of double-digit wins that we have. That means a lot. And the narrative of your program, if you're Notre Dame, it sounds a lot different and it looks a lot different as you look back, in the rear view mirror now at those seasons and see 5 straight seasons of double-digit wins. Because as we've seen the last couple of years, that is not always as easy as sometimes it was made out to look.
Yeah, we got spoiled by how easy BK made it in his last few, 4 or 5 seasons after that horrible, 2-10 season, 3-9 season. I can't remember, whatever it was. But after that, he flipped the switch and he was just a 10-win machine. That's all he did, is he won 10 games a year.
4-8.
What does it matter? We're getting caught up in the minor details. And I think there's a couple great comments in here. Programs aren't built in a season. It took Kirby Smart with Georgia and all of their 4 and 5 stars 6 years to overcome Alabama and eventually win the national championship. That's what I'm getting at. Like, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Marcus Freeman and his building of this program and reconstructing it how he sees fit isn't done in 2 seasons. And so just because you don't reach the national championship in the New Year's 6, it's not just time to throw it out. There's still a meaningful progress for this program to make in these last 2 games going into the bowl game. All of these games matter. They matter just as much as the Ohio State game. They matter just as much as the USC game, the Clemson game. They just matter. And you can't get caught up of, what these records look like on these other teams. The season as a whole, it's not broken down. You play games week by week, but you evaluate the season as a whole. And that's what Notre Dame still needs to do to have a proper evaluation, is to finish these 2 games out just how they played the Ohio State games, the USC games, every other meaningful game this season.
Yeah, so Andre on the quarterback development specifically says everything needs to be in-house, because if we can't develop a quarterback, what are we then? What quarterback will come here? And that's exactly right. Like, you've already taken transfer portal quarterbacks in 2 of the last 3 years. One of them worked out a lot better than the other one. And it's, the guy who we probably had a heck of a lot more questions about going into, that season, 2021, with Jack Cohn than Sam Hartman. And, it hasn't worked out the way anyone thought it was going to work out this year. And so, that's why I look at, you just had the most experienced quarterback you're ever going to get. And with all the touchdown passes and everything else. So now you're talking about going out and getting another transfer portal quarterback for next year to mask some of the inexperience. And again, what this guy, things that you wanted him from behind the scenes in terms of helping the younger guys, all that kind of stuff. I just don't see how the benefits of going out and getting a guy to be your starter out of the transfer portal outweighs developing your own guys and setting that path forward with your program. I don't see how that outweighs that. Do you?
No, I agree completely with what you're saying.
Thank you. Bobby, thanks again for the super chat. He says he loves the shirt. Go Cowboys, go Irish. At least there are some smart people watching and listening to this show. I kid, of course. But I think Tommy took off on us, by the way. I was kind of throwing him, some fun little jabs with the Marine Corps birthday and stuff at the start, but he didn't really bite on it. So I think he's out there driving still.
Just listening.
I think DK maybe summed it up best. How should Notre Dame handle the quarterback situation? Some light torture this week, sleep deprecation, waterboarding, and the Barney song on a continuous loop. I think that just might do it.
DK, how do you have such a plan developed? What are you trying to tell us right now?
Oh, Jess. All right. Well, I know that you're on not a tight schedule, but tight enough that we probably need to keep it moving at this point. And I saved one of the questions from the chat for rapid fire. So are you ready for rapid fire?
I'm fired up for rapid fire. I thought this was a really good discussion, and I think it gets a lot of people fired up. That's what this whole thing should do. Is it should create conversation, and you should be able to formulate your own opinions. That's what makes this so fun.
Yeah. So here's the question out of the chat from JU. True or false? This is the most disappointing season in 40 plus years. I say yes, and I have a solid argument. Okay, I don't know if JU actually threw in his solid argument or if he's still there, but he says, 40 years is a long time. And when I think about the 80s, Jerry Faust and all that kind of stuff, there was some disappointment after when they were ranked kind of early on and things spiraled from there. I think probably what would that have been? 95 when things started to go south for Lou Holtz. There was some disappointment there. The two that stand out to me, though, in more recent memory, as true disappointments, were Charlie Weiss going 3-9 in 2007 when the roster turned over and he wasn't ready for it, after losing Brady Quinn and Jeff Samardzija and Zibikowski and all those guys. I would say 2007 first, and then 2016, you're only 4 years removed from playing in a national championship game, and you go 4-8. And obviously now that ended up being sort of a blessing in disguise, just the way Brian Kelly, was forced to make some changes and stuff like that. And it brought about the 5 consecutive 10 plus win seasons. But I think that there were pretty, the floor was supposed to be a New Year's Six bowl, I think, with this team. So there were definitely fairly lofty expectations coming into this season. So I do think that it is disappointing. I don't know that I would put it as more disappointing than those other 2 seasons because, again, 07, you're coming off back-to-back BCS bowls, what they were called, now New Year's Six, but you're coming off back-to-back BCS bowls, and then you fall from that to 3-9, and then 2016, you weren't in great shape, but you were in a New Year's Six bowl the year before that. So I don't know. What do you think, Jess? Where do you rank this season in terms of disappointment?
So I would put it in my top 5 for sure. And I'm doing it. I didn't do 40 years. I did since I could remember watching Notre Dame football. So start me at around 2000, 2001 is where I think I would start kind of, going back to. First one that comes to mind is 2003, 5-7 under Tyrone Willingham after going 10-3 the year before. I thought that obviously started the downturn of the Tyrone Willingham era. And then you brought up the other two, 2007, with Charlie Weiss after the roster turnover, just to be that bad, right? I know you lost some stuff, but to just be that bad, and be 3-9. And then of course, 2016, 4-8, not a great season, a lot of close games. But I think the reason I put this one up there, and I think I would have this probably second, maybe first actually, is you had a really good shot to beat programs that have really handcuffed you the last 20 years and have been at the top of the college football realm. This is the weakest Ohio State's been in probably 20 years. And the big knock on Notre Dame,
number one in the country right now.
And they're number one in the country right now. And you were seconds away from beating them. And so that to me is what really makes this season hurt. And then the loss to Clemson also hurts just as much because you had the opportunity to put that foot on Clemson. Dabo got questioned in his early in the week. Clemson has its back up against the wall. They're kind of questioning who they are as a program. And you had the opportunity to just kick them in the face, right? You had the opportunity to put them out of their misery, to put a program out of misery that's averaging 10 wins a season or more over the last decade. And you squandered that opportunity, and you squandered an opportunity to beat an Ohio State team when the knock on you as Notre Dame is you don't win the big ones. And so when you have the opportunity to beat Ohio State and now the eventual number one team in the country, those are two big letdowns. You basically squandered two opportunities to beat two of the top programs in the last 2 decades, and you simply couldn't get it done. One of the games you were 30 seconds away. The other game, you just looked like crap majority of the game, and it just wasn't a good performance overall. And so I would say with the amount of talent on the defense, and it's a national championship level defense, with Audric Estime as your running back, and still a pretty solid offensive line. It's not a great offense. It's not an elite offensive line like it's been in the past. But to squander all of that and all of the young talent that you're integrating in on offense, I do say that this is probably one of the most wasted seasons that Notre Dame has had.
So a couple of different things. I mean, you laid out your points very well. As JU follows up, he says those teams, and he's talking about the 07 and the 2016 seasons that I mentioned. He says those teams weren't even slightly close to as talented as this one. And that's completely fair. But 3-9, did you expect Notre Dame to go 3-9? Are you going to tell me you weren't 10 times as miserable? I guess not 3-9, 4-8 in 2016, but then 3-9 in 2007. In either case, are you going to tell me that you weren't 10 times more miserable, assuming you were a Notre Dame fan at that point, than you are right now watching this? Because let's do simple math. 2007, they were 3-9. 2016, they were 4-8. 3 and 7 add up, or 3 and 4 add up to 7, which is how many wins you have right now. At least it's a winning season. It might not be nearly, as close to what you thought it was going to be, but at least they're 7-3 with a chance to go to a bowl and win a bowl game. I know that based on the standard and the expectations coming into the season, that's still a pretty far drop. And I get it. and that's ultimately it. Based on your expectations, like expectations determine your attitude in the end.
That's true.
Like how big a disappointment is it? It's like it's why I dumb down my expectations every time I watch the Cowboys on Sundays anymore.
Can't get mad if you don't have
No,
high
that's right.
expectations.
But JU had a couple follow. He said we have an elite defense, all-time leader in the ACC, best running back in America. I mean, fair points. This one, best offensive line in America, best safety. I think he might have followed up and said best offensive lineman, but
Single offensive lineman.
yeah. Yeah, and I get it. You want to put this as worse. I get it because, again, it's where your expectations were coming into the season. But I still say, to me, those two sub 500 seasons are more disappointing because they were just god awful both years. Awful. Those were awful teams. That was not fun to sit through any of that. At least you've been able to watch some watchable football for like part of this
There's been
season.
flashes of greatness.
And they did have a chance to beat Ohio State. And I think that's kind of where the disappointment really starts, though, is what you said. When you had a chance to win a game like that you haven't been able to win, and in some cases haven't even been really competitive against that program, and you had a chance, especially to do it at home. It was all within your reach, and then you completely coached it away at the end.
And that's where some would say the season started to unravel too, Yep.
That's exactly right. So now, Marcus Freeman, or not Marcus Freeman, Sam Hartman, fill in the blank. It's blank that ESPN ranks Sam Hartman as the number 14 quarterback on their list of draft-eligible quarterbacks for next year's draft.
ESPN ranking of Sam Hartman at 14 is on par. There's nothing that I've seen this season that would show me that he deserves to be in the top 10. And at the beginning of the season, we had this conversation, and I thought it was crazy that Sam Hartman realistically wasn't even a top 5 quarterback. And I don't know if I could make the case for him being a top 10 quarterback, right? And so that is just the overall frustration with it. He hasn't played like a top 10 quarterback. And I know we've pointed out issues within the offense, but the offensive coordinator, but Sam Hartman has also had his issues. And I just don't think he's done anything to really help his draft stock overall this season. And so, if it's 14, if it's 11, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know all the quarterbacks who would be ahead of Sam Hartman. But with what I've seen, it's just what feels right. And he's just not, I just don't see him as an elite quarterback right now. And so again, if he's not top 6, 7, I really don't think it matters beyond that. And I wouldn't, I guess I wouldn't argue or jockey for him to be like, if it's 14, if it's 8, if it's 9, I just don't really care because he's not an elite quarterback.
No, that's right. And, we'll get into some more of it here in a second. Here's a couple things that they said about him. He's completed 75% of his throws and thrown 8 touchdown passes on throws under 10 yards this season. Getting the ball out hasn't been a problem. Getting the ball out quickly hasn't been a problem for him. Quick decision maker, but he has also been accurate on deep throws, even though his arm strength has limitations. Where he needs work, while he has plenty of success in the pocket, pressure has rushed him into making premature decisions when under duress. And hit this season, Hartman has only completed 31.7% of his throws, which ranks outside the FBS's top 100. He doesn't have the playmaking ability to create extra opportunities outside the normal structure of plays with any consistency. And these are the reasons.
Honest,
this is a day 3. Yeah, it's very honest. And he's going to be a day 3 guy. And so, like, when you look at, would Sam Hartman opt out of a bowl game to go prepare for the draft and all that kind of stuff? There's only so much. He is who he is at this point. He's a day 3 guy, and nothing. And again, this is not a personal shot at Sam Hartman, but nothing he does between now and then is going to turn him into a day 1 or 2 guy. He is who he is right now. He's going to be fighting for a roster spot, just like Ian Book was, and Ian Book, was also a day 3 guy picked in the 4th round. And I think it's going to be a tougher road for Hartman just based on the body of work that we have right now.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying there, Sam Hartman can't do anything to, I don't think, ultimately harm him. And I don't think he can do anything to really rise his draft stock in these last 2 to 3 games. So that's why I think he just lets it rip these last 3 games. I think he's going to play all 3. I think he's going to close out his college career. But I don't think that there's anything really that he can do to lessen his stock or drastically improve his stock. So I think he's going to play both games, or all the games. Sorry.
I do too. Andre says, do you think we were expecting too much of Hartman? Regardless of where he came from, our offense is a lot different. I will say this. We had fairly high expectations for Hartman coming into the season because of all the experience. And I don't think it's the change in the system. There's just some things are not firing, between him, the coordinator, the game plan, whatever it happens to be. But I think that those first 5 games, really 4.5 probably, built up our expectation, because this is he had 15 touchdowns and no interceptions to open up the season. And there's Heisman talk that's creeping in there and all this different stuff. And then the Ohio State game comes. So my point is, like, you talk about the expectations of this season, they only grew higher and higher each week as Hartman was having all that success and the offense was looking so much different against those teams that, quite frankly, were just not as good as what they've faced in the last month and a half now. So I think the expectations ratcheted up, and, not a fault of Hartman, but he kind of like he turned the expectations on himself by having so much success early on as well.
Oh man, Tim B just made the comment of the century in the chat. So Sam owes Jesse some of that NIL money to cover those bets. Tim, you keep great notes. I have like 300 on his passing yards, 300 on his passing touchdowns. It is not going to settle out nicely at the end of the season as well. I had Notre Dame 10+ wins. I have Notre Dame over 8.5 wins. So at least that one's still on the table. I'm banking on the passing yards, but I'm not holding my breath. The touchdowns are definitely shot.
Andrew said, if Hartman was at Notre Dame for years, then I would say the program owes him, but he already got paid more than if he went to the NFL.
Oh, I know what else I was going to say too. Yeah. Based off your what you were saying, Steve Angeli could have won those first 4 games, I believe. I think the only one that gets dicey is NC State, right?
Yeah.
And so when Notre Dame really needed Sam Hartman the most, his quote-unquote experience, and I said this before, and I think a lot of people thought I was crazy at the time, Sam Hartman was just a guy, right? He was just a dude out there against Ohio State. Kyle McCord played at the same level as him. Notre Dame needed him just to be a little bit better, starting with Ohio State. And he hasn't done that. And that's ultimately the difference in this season, I think. Combined with Jared Parker, offensive coordinator. Anyone could have probably won those games leading up to Ohio State. But when Notre Dame really needed Sam Hartman the most, a little bit better play than what they were given, Sam Hartman simply didn't do it. And that's just the reality of the situation.
That's exactly it. And that's why you get a quarterback with his experience from the portal, because you had that stretch where you were going to play Ohio State and where you were going to play USC and where you're going to play Clemson. And as it turns out, worst case scenario, they've only won one of those 3 games, plus lost to Louisville. And not the Ohio State game, but in those other cases, when you look at Sam Hartman's interceptions, he's at least part of the reason why they lost. I'm not saying he's the only reason why. I'm not putting it all on him, but when you look at the turnovers, he's part of the reason why. And you're exactly right. He did not elevate. He brought you back. And I mean, you can make the argument, would they have been that much worse off with Drew Pine at quarterback this year? And based on the results, the answer is no. Okay. I just got a text there. So, Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick was on the most recent edition of Notre Dame's Wake Up the Echoes podcast. He said this about Marcus Freeman being able to win a national championship at Notre Dame. Quote, I personally feel more strongly today than the day I made the decision, but I think we got the right head coach to take us there. End quote. And again, take us there is winning a national championship. So do you buy or sell it?
I'm overall going to buy this because I know it's one thing. You're not just going to go on a Notre Dame sponsored podcast and say negative things about a head coach, right? But at the end of the day, I still think he had a very healthy dose of Brian Kelly. And I think it's very easy to draw, comparisons of maybe stuff that Freeman is better at and ultimately not as good at in comparison to Brian Kelly. And so I think it's if Jack Swarbrick is actually objectively looking at it in that manner and seeing, knowing who Brian Kelly was and what he led the program to do, and now seeing who Marcus Freeman is and the changes he's made maybe in recruiting, overall coaching style, everything else, and he makes that kind of statement, I'm going to buy it. So that's where I'm at.
First of all, exact right point about it's not like he was going to say something derogatory about Marcus Freeman publicly, for one, and especially on a Notre Dame podcast called Wake Up the Echoes. It's not like he was going to say, oh no, Marcus Freeman, not the guy to get us there. But no, you're exactly right. Swarbrick has said up front there were going to be growing pains with an inexperienced head coach. But the trade-off is if this inexperienced head coach can recruit at the level that he showed that he could do and lead at the level that he showed that he could do in his 1 year here as defensive coordinator, you're willing to take that trade-off because now you're stacking success on top of success in terms of your recruiting, and over time you expect that can help at least cover some of those warts and some of those growing pains that you incur along the way. And by the time those two things sort of match up, intersect, whatever you want to call it, you're the mathematician here. I don't know if I'm using my terms right, but by the time that those things do match up, you've got a more experienced head coach and you've got a roster chock full of talent. And when you look at, I think it's pretty easy to see because we've talked about it. When you look at the youth on this roster, the freshmen and sophomores that he is at least in part responsible for bringing in here, there's a lot of good things to point to. So I will buy it as well.
And I think just to kind of close this off, the number one thing that Swarbrick, I think, has to be refreshed by is, again, just the way that Marcus Freeman leads a group of men compared to Brian Kelly. I just think he's a better leader. And the thing that I admire the most about Marcus Freeman is that he always leads with, it goes through me. It's always, it's a trickle down effect starting with me. That was never the case with the other coach. These are young men transitioning into being men, and you're directly throwing the blame at them. Marcus Freeman has never done that. And so I think that has to weigh into it for Swarbrick as well. I think he's a better leader of men than Brian Kelly was.
Yes. I think the biggest question, because you can talk about some of his, game strategies and stuff like that. The biggest question hanging out there right now is, we talked about 2016. Brian Kelly had to be forced to go outside and bring in some outside voices at the coordinator positions on his staff. He had to get outside his comfort zone. And he had to do some other things differently as well. But that was like, if Brian Kelly was going to stay, that was what he had to do. He had to make those changes. The question is Marcus, is Marcus Freeman, is he going to stay loyal to his guys because he hired them? Or is he going to stay loyal to himself and the program and see that he needs to make changes and make them of his own volition before he is forced to? Because If it comes to the point when you're forced to, that probably means that there are going to be much bumpier roads ahead if it comes to that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the biggest thing right now is how Marcus Freeman is going to sort of deal with some of those uncomfortable situations for the betterment of both himself and his program going forward. It's going to be a difference maker, I think. So another interesting topic that came up on that same podcast, next year's 12-team college football playoff field. They talked about on-campus first-round games and how when they design the format, the Southern schools made sure that the Northern teams would be allowed to move their home games to a different location, i.e. domed stadiums. Their assumption was that surely the Northern schools would want to move out of the cold weather. Swarbrick smiled and said, "Oh, no, we don't." So what do you think about that?
I think that's a great business decision on behalf of Notre Dame. It's a clear home field advantage, having to come play, ultimately in December inside South Bend. That is cold weather, that is snow, and that is an environment that Notre Dame at least has more comfortability or experience practicing in, playing in, whatever it might be. And so when you're in high leverage games, I think you have to take as much of an advantage as possible. And so why would I make it comfy and cushy for, and get rid of it and make it a neutral site game when I can force a team to come all the way to South Bend, have a great home field environment in which Notre Dame is tremendously good at home compared to the road and neutral sites. And then again, you factor in weather and all that stuff. It's a great, great decision to keep the game in South Bend. And I would be screaming if they decided to move the game to a neutral site dome.
That's right. I mean, there are going to be some things to figure out about hosting games in December when it is potentially, Arctic cold out there and snowing. But if you're Notre Dame or any other school in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, where you do have the chance to get that weather, and you've got an Alabama or a Tennessee or, whoever it happens to be coming up north to play in December, you absolutely want to stick them out there in the cold and make them feel it, make them as uncomfortable as possible. I love this. I love the fact that that's not even a consideration for them. And I remember asking Marcus Freeman about this about a year ago at this time when the 12-team stuff was coming up, whether or not he would want to play home games out there in December or move them into a dome stadium. And he was right along the same line. Get them out there, get them in the cold. That's one of the biggest home field advantages you can have. And even though Notre Dame is not going to practice outside in the cold, I mean, like we've all been around here. We know what it's like from really November through sometimes the end of April, how cold it is here in South Bend. So even though those guys aren't actually out there playing games in it right now, they're living in it every day. So huge advantage. I love the fact that they did it. All right, one final question for today, because I know that you've got to get going. Cowboys are a minus 16.5 point favorite against the Giants this weekend. It is the largest NFL spread for any game this season. 16.5 points. Scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you the Cowboys cover?
I would put that at a solid 9 out of 10. I would not say the same if Daniel Jones was playing this week. I know he's not great, but the Giants are going to have to play another backup quarterback. The Cowboys destroyed the Giants on the road to begin the season. I think that they're going to do the same at home. Hopefully it's not, what's it called? A trap game, considering, how much hype and how much, everything that surrounded that Cowboys and Eagles game last week. I just hope that same, as long as the Cowboys play with that same energy and execution that they did last week, I have no issues believing that this spread will be covered. But that's the biggest inconsistency about the Cowboys, is you never know how they're going to play on any given week.
Yeah, they're still the team that the Arizona Cardinals' only win is against the Cowboys, right? Like that'll kind of stick in the back of your head. Like the Giants have had some close games, but you're right. Without Daniel Jones, watching that Raiders Giants game last week. I'm right with you. I'm 9 out of 10 that they will cover it. Michael, the race to 2-15. He is just hoping for the number one pick in the draft right now. And of course, you've got the Bears and the Panthers coming up tonight, who are in that derby with you. So,
Oof, that's a
someone
battle
got to
of the
win, someone
JV
got to
Bowl.
lose. Oh my gosh! It'll be
At
on
least
in
if you're
our
the
household.
Panthers, it's like they're not going to go quarterback again because they just took quarterback. So really, who cares where they finish? If you're in terms of if the Bears and some of these other teams that the Giants that desperately need a new quarterback, even though the Giants just inked Daniel Jones to a fat contract.
I love it. I love it. Peter says DeVito is a legendary name, though. He was the Penguin for Pete's sake. I mean, good point. Good point. All right. Well, that is going to do it for tonight. Thanks for being here and enjoy your bye weekend. We'll be back Monday, of course. I think it might be Vince and I together next Monday. I don't even know the last time Vince and I have done a show together, but it's been Jesse and I, the last 2 nights. Enjoy whatever football you watch tonight and this weekend as well. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe, rate, and review. Dynamite drop in there, Jess. We'll talk to you next week on IB Nation Sports Talk.